Welcome to the National Pulse, the official podcast of the Fitness Industry Council of Canada. I'm your host, Zach Weston, and we are the collective voice of over 7,000 facilities and 7 million members from coast to coast to coast. From the steps of Parliament Hill in Ottawa to the floor of your local gym, we are here to discuss the policy, the people, and the passion driving our industry forward. We're talking to the innovators, the disruptors, and the leaders who are evolving the Canadian fitness business landscape with the goal to support, promote, and protect our industry while we move to make Canada the fittest nation on earth. Welcome back to part 2 of the conversation with Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky. But let's maybe shift gears a little bit. We talked earlier, or you mentioned some of the work that Stu Phillips' research at McMaster has shown in terms of muscle protein synthesis and muscle gains and functionality in older adults. And you're an endurance athlete yourself, but you also advocate for resistance strength training. We've got Canadian physical activity guidelines that, I think the main message people take away from that, sadly, is, they need to get 150 minutes of exercise per week, but often gloss over the strength training at least twice a week aspect of it. That seems to be almost like an afterthought. For you, what's the minimum effective dose for a busy professional to maintain muscle mass?
Yeah, muscle mass is doing weight training for muscle mass is something that I didn't consider when I was younger. I mean, at one point I was, representing Canada in 3 different endurance sports, and we never thought about it because you don't need that extra muscle. Look at the Tour de France riders. I mean, they totally do not want to do any weight training on their arms. You look at the top people in the world, Tadej Pogacar, he's super skinny up above. You don't need that extra weight. But as we get older, what I realize, which is very true, and all the research shows this, when you get into your 30s and your 40s, you slowly start losing muscle mass. And I used to do carpentry a lot, and lifting up a thing of shingles, I could throw it on my shoulder, carry it up a ladder, no problems when I was 17, 18, 19. But I was doing some construction work. I couldn't believe what I couldn't do, into my 50s and early 60s. So I've incorporated more resistance training into my regimen from a health span perspective. 2 times a week, we show benefit. We published a study in 2017 where we did older adults training twice per week. And this was, comprehensive circuit set type of weight training. And that was sufficient to increase muscle mass, increase strength in both men and women. So we know that twice a week is fine. We've also done 3 times a week. In 2003, we published that again, showing that the creatine further enhanced the benefits. But even without creatine, we still could show that twice per week doing a circuit set is reasonable. So I think 2 would be the minimum. 3 is probably more ideal. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We would also recommend taking a day off so that muscle protein synthesis can fully, go through, because it usually lasts for up to 48 hours afterwards. And then alternate that with endurance. We have done studies where you do both on the same day. One can do that, and we've found no different if you do it on alternate days or both on the same day. But from a convenience perspective, I think for most people, a little bit of cardio to warm up, do your weights. The next day, focus more on cardio. The next day, go back to cardio warm up, and then your weights. And make sure you get 3 cardio minimum per week, and I would say a minimum of 2, but ideally 3 resistance training activities. And it doesn't have to be specifically weights. There's plyometric things that you can do and functional body activities, but you want to be, doing something where that muscle's starting to fatigue after, sort of 12 to 15 contractions, where it's pretty hard to do the next one. So that's stressing the muscle at a higher intensity. And then we get muscle protein synthesis, we get hypertrophy and increase in strength, which is what we want. Because Bengt Saltine, one of the most famous exercise physiologists in the world, did some studies on top marathoners who were in their 60s and 70s and found that their leg strength was really no different than sedentary people if they were not doing weight training. Our study that we published, we had people doing more cycling. So some of those cycling athletes did maintain strength better, because cycling, it's a little bit more resistance. And so it's better at maintaining your quadriceps. But certainly running, there's very little quadriceps strength adaptability, and it really doesn't protect that strength loss. So I'm a big fan of both. And Much as I'm not a huge fan of doing it, I every day do my sit-ups and push-ups. I've done 3.5 million push-ups and about 4 million crunches and sit-ups in the last 40 years. But now I'm starting to add like actual little circuit weight sets as well to cover more muscle mass and some leg press to get me off the toilet, get me up a flight of stairs as I get further into my 60s.
Well, that's often, one of the things I had, for years told my cardiac rehab patients, in my opinion, if there's only one exercise, strength resistance exercise you do is squats. You need that ability to get up from the euchre table or the card table, get up off the toilet, have that strength in your legs. And so if we think about, aging, other issues that people often bring up, of course, are obesity and metabolic dysfunction. And so there's this work that you've done with regards to protecting the metabolism. And with Trim 7, which I actually have some, you focus on protecting metabolism during weight loss. And I'd like you to maybe talk to us about why most traditional diets actually damage our metabolic rate in the long run, and why this Trim 7 product takes such a different approach to supporting weight loss.
Yeah, so it's a good point, and there's a lot to unpack there. First and foremost, it's very true that as we lose muscle over time, the muscle doesn't convert into fat. But if we're doing less as we get older, we might have knee pain. Our jobs, get more of a
Hmm.
challenge. You're stressed out at the end of the day, have an extra beer, or, some, highly processed food. Most people do tend to increase body fat over time. And that's something that's difficult to mitigate. Studies have clearly shown that if you fast, so you go on a low calorie diet, decrease by 600 or 700 calories, for example, on a 2,400 calorie diet, and studies have shown after 6 months, there is a loss of muscle and there's a loss of bone. Now, what's interesting is that the problem there is that if you lose bone and muscle, and let's say you go off that diet, which many people do, because it's a really difficult thing for most folks, especially with kids and work and
Hmm.
everything, to maintain that discipline, and then you recover. It's everyone knows that when you bounce back, you tend to gain a little bit more body
Hmm.
fat, and it's harder to regain that muscle. And so that's a situation that's been well known for 40, 50 years, this sort of yo-yo effect. And then what happens is you keep 3 or 4 yo-yos, you gain more fat back, you gain little muscle, do it again, you lose some muscle, lose some bone, gain it back. And the issue now is whether you decrease your energy intake from just cutting back calories, whether you go on bariatric surgery and get a small
Hmm.
stomach to decrease energy intake, or the most popular thing everyone knows about are the GLP-1 receptor agonists. So what they do mainly is they tell your gut to, stop. Okay, there's enough food coming in. That's what the protein normally does. So as we eat, when the food goes into the intestine, the GLP-1 says, okay, let's hold up here. And the other protein is gastric inhibitory polypeptide. So it tells the gut to stop pumping. So you feel full. It also goes to the brain and says, stop eating. So it works the same way. There's nothing magic about it. It's very similar to those other two ways of decreasing energy intake. But as we would all expect, which is now the dirty little secret the companies didn't want people to know, is you lose muscle and you lose bone. A study by Dr. Villarreal in New England Journal of Medicine a few years ago showed that endurance resistance exercise and optimization of the diet wasn't sufficient to prevent the lean body mass loss and the bone loss. It attenuated it dramatically. So I would advocate for everyone that's your core is your resistance and endurance exercise. But what we've started to look at is what other ways can we really help metabolism. So
Hmm.
going back to my core medical specialty, which is mitochondrial disease, people with these horrible mitochondrial disorders, I've been very interested in how we can sort of turn on the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of our cell. And when we look at the 12 factors associated with aging, all of them really can be traced back to the mitochondria. So I call that our centric approach, that the mitochondrial dysfunction as we get older really triggers most of the other 12 factors associated with aging: decreased protein synthesis, impaired autophagy, and the list goes on and on. So in 2001, we put forward the hypothesis that to actually deal with mitochondrial dysfunction, we have to consider exercise, which is the best strategy to improve
Hmm.
mitochondria. But from a nutritional perspective, what can we do? How can we help our patients who have horrible mitochondrial disease who can't exercise? So we suggested that we have combination antioxidants, which we know get into the mitochondria, protection of the different
Hmm.
membranes of the mitochondria, creatine because of its antioxidant protection and facilitation of metabolism. So we put those all together in 2007 in a clinical study of patients with mitochondrial disease, and we showed that we significantly lowered oxygen stress or oxidative damage. We improved mitochondrial function. And everyone poo-pooed it and said, well, we don't know what four ingredients are working. So we took out one that everyone knows called coenzyme Q10, gave it to our patients at super high doses, didn't do a darn thing. So from that, what we did is we said, well, look, with aging, with obesity, people have mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress. Why don't we use that as our core? But let's review the world literature and see what other things potentially could go into this. So we did combinations of 10 different ingredients with creatine, CLA, green tea extract, green coffee bean extract, our mitochondrial core, beetroot extract, and we did all
Wow.
sorts of combinations and showed unexpectedly that the seven ingredients, which went into what we call Trim 7, were the most potent at taking our white adipose tissue, which is what we have under our skin. That's our storage form of adipose tissue, which is where most of our fat is stored. And we turned on the mitochondria. That's called browning of the adipose tissue. So instead of being a sink, we turned it into a furnace. And what was interesting is that in the preclinical models, we were actually maintaining or improving muscle mass, which is the first time you could actually lose body fat and increase muscle from a nutraceutical or even a drug. There's no drug
Mm.
that does that. I mean, there is one infusion called vigabatrin, which can do that a little bit, but it's about $1 million a year, and you have to get an infusion every 2 weeks. And it pretty much failed in studies in older adults. But nevertheless, so the TRIM 7 from our preclinical work, we took it into a human clinical trial. Both men and women took it. And after 3 months of being on it, we found that they lost body fat. Most of it was in the trunk. So it was this sort of
Mm.
central adiposity that was lost when we separated it out with DEXA scans, but no loss of muscle. So that was sort of a unique concept. We've now paired with the University of Waterloo. So we were independent in our company of this, where we took Muscle 5 and Trim 7, probably your ultimate combination for aging and for someone doing exercise, paired the two together in men and women who were overweight or had obesity. And we trained them supervised training, exactly as we talked about, the endurance plus the resistance, what we call the Endurex program, which I think is
Hmm.
the health span. And at the end of it, Michaela is going to be publishing this, so I won't steal all of her thunder, but
Mm.
it's pretty clear that body composition was much better for those who took the Muscle 5 and Trim 7 versus collagen peptides, which was our placebo. You always have to have a placebo control. Uh, and it didn't attenuate any of the adaptations. So people got the same or slightly better adaptations. But more importantly, they were able to improve their body composition, more muscle, less fat, which is a real challenge. So that's kind of the evolution of where this Trim 7 came from. It came from patients with horrible genetic mitochondrial disease and then careful preclinical work, which cost millions of dollars, and then a clinical trial, a second clinical trial done by an independent third party. And this really, I think, is how we're different and why we're not making zillions of dollars is that all the money we've raised is to go into the proper studies, taking a pharmacological approach to the development of nutraceuticals because there's so much garbage and hand waving and
Hmm.
doing bimbo marketing garbage and selling complete healthcare fraud to make a profit. But our whole life has been about caring for patients, caring about improving people's journey throughout their health span to optimize people's health span. And with endurance exercise, 4 year extension to your lifespan, as well as the improvement in health span.
Hmm. Outstanding. There's sadly so much misinformation, and your approach has gone counter to that to provide the evidence while also creating quality. And I think ultimately that's what we need. We need the evidence that highlights the value, but also provides the evidence that it works with alternative options. And we're in a reality where GLP-1 options are prevalent. They're easily accessible for many, although they are expensive. And increasingly, shortly we're going to also see celebrity endorsements, for the utilization of GLP-1s in high profile settings, like in the middle of the Super Bowl. So, there is some evidence, I think, for some populations, but I think it's really important that we highlight the quality of the evidence and the research that's gone into products that people can consume that are far cheaper than GLP-1 injections. I think a lot of people don't realize, for the most part, currently they're injections, and there are some negative side effects with regards to muscle mass and preservation. Um, but you've also noted that a large percentage of the population is also deficient in vitamin D and B12. And in addition, you've quoted studies that show that omega-3 intake is less than optimal for children and adults. How do these specific deficiencies also contribute to poisoning or negatively impacting our mitochondrial function?
Yeah, so they don't all affect mitochondria, but they affect very important processes. And we'll start with vitamin D. Vitamin D, as you know, is a sunshine vitamin. Essentially, under our skin, 7-dehydrocholesterol is converted into vitamin D. And then vitamin D helps us to absorb calcium, so that then is beneficial on bone. And it also has a direct effect on bone. What people don't realize is that it's also important for muscle. And we've had patients referred to me for high muscle enzymes in their blood, which usually reflects muscle damage and fatigue. And we found in 2 cases there was non-detectable vitamin D. And
Mm.
so what people forget is that with the disease called rickets, where vitamin D deficiency causes damage to the bone and the bones bend in young children, they also get a myopathy or muscle disorder. So what we've been doing for the last 10 years is measuring vitamin D levels in all of our patients, and we find that 13% are in the rickets range. So that's not good for your bone. It's also not good for your muscle. So anything less than 25 nanomoles per liter, you're at risk for rickets. You never want to be in that range. I just got a level today on a kid who is supposedly healthy and exercised too hard and got some damage to his muscle called rhabdomyolysis. So we
Hmm.
checked to see what factors were going on, and his vitamin D level is 25 nanomoles per liter. So I just prescribed 5,000 units for him. Anyhow, what we find is 85% of patients are under the current recommended guidelines of 75.
85. Wow.
75
85%.
85% are below the 75
Mm.
nanomoles per liter. And that's not going to, you're not going to feel that. It's not going to affect your bone. But in the long run, there's some evidence that it could have benefits from a cardiovascular health. So we recommend for Canadians, you should be taking 2,000 international units. That's just my recommendation to my patients. And, my wife and I, most people I think take it. We put 1,000 into the Muscle 5. Because of a Health Canada cap at that level. Ideally, I really do believe that 2,000 should be in there, but you can, buy your vitamin D from Costco,
Right.
$7 for half a year's supply. So that's vitamin D, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that we see from a deficiency perspective in Canada. We also check our patients for vitamin B12 deficiency, and around 10% or so are deficient in vitamin B12, and that's a critical one. So people who are vegans, absolutely critical. You've got to be checked and take your vitamin B12 because you don't get
Hmm.
it from plant sources. But even older adults, the so-called tea and toasters who are at risk for protein deficiency, also are at risk for vitamin B12 deficiency. With B12 deficiency, about half of those folks also have low folate, and the two work together. So getting those measured and replaced, especially if people have suboptimal diets, is reasonable. If you're excessively tired and fatigued, in addition to checking your thyroid, it would be reasonable to check B12 and vitamin D as well if you're not taking them to make sure that they're optimized. So those are some of the other vitamins to consider, and that's why we put vitamin D here. You mentioned omega-3s. The first company that I started decades ago came out of work that was done at the University of Guelph. Bruce Holub had done some work there. He's a world-class researcher in that area. and found that the average Canadian child was only taking in 30 milligrams that was called DHA,
Hmm.
docosahexaenoic acid, which is one of the two main constituents of fish oil in terms of the bioactives. And for optimal brain and retinal development, he figured that they should be taking 60. So we started a company called Life Science Nutritionals, and we're still in Costco now, bought out by a different company called Iron Kids. So the Iron Kids Omega was what I created based on Bruce's excellent research to
Hmm.
take kids from the average of 30 up to what they should be getting, which was 60. So that's what the omega-3 came from. Now, Stu Phillips did a study with Graham Holloway, who did some work on the mitochondria. And what they found is when they used high doses, sort of your tablespoon of fish oil level of fish oil in young women who had a cast put on their leg. Normally, when you put a cast on your leg, we showed years ago that mitochondria drop off quickly, which is probably one of the reasons as we get older, we get injuries, we, become immobile for a period of time, why the mitochondria start to drop. And what he found is that there was less mitochondrial drop when they consumed the omega fish oils. So the omega-3 fish oils do improve fluidity of some of the membranes and seem to have a beneficial effect on mitochondria. So, as part of our original study with the Muscle 5, we had fish oil as well in both Stu's study and our study. More recently with Michaela, we didn't have the fish oil. We had that paired up with Trim 7. So, I think it's a very reasonable addition for most individuals. I've heard evolutionary evidence that our omega-3 to omega-6 ratio used to be much higher. So we had higher omega-3s in our diet, and certainly people who eat a lot of fish are going to be fine from that perspective. But many of the processed oils and stuff have more omega-6s. So to restore that
Hmm.
balance, taking some fish oil is certainly a reasonable thing to consider.
Outstanding. And I think this kind of leads us right into talking about the stay above philosophy and the name of your company, and where you've kind of taken all of the decades worth of clinical research evidence, and you through that have mentioned this concept of the disability threshold in your work. And I'm wondering if you can explain what it means to stay above and why we should start thinking about this in our 30s rather than in our 70s.
Yeah, well, first of all, even in our 30s, between 30, 35, and age 65, as I mentioned, we lose about 30% of our alpha motor neurons, which are the ones that come down to your muscle. That's a contributor to this loss in muscle mass, this loss in strength. Women, for example, from a bone perspective, are hitting their peak bone mass in their 20s and 30s, and it's downhill from there, and then a more rapid drop during menopause. So many things are changing as we get older, and these don't start suddenly when you're 65. You don't go like this and then drop down at 65. It's a slow decline. For women, a little bit more of a rapid decline around the perimenopausal period, which is a critical time to be considering these things. And if we can change that slope a little bit. So if we think about a threshold, so over time, if our strength is slowly going down, we're going to get to a point when we're 80 or 90 where 30% of the population has a hard time going upstairs or getting up from a chair. So we can call that disability. Can't get off your chair, got to go into a long-term care. My cousin's coming up from North Carolina to put her mom into a nursing home, sadly, because she can't get up on her own. So that's a disability threshold, which about 30% of the population starts to hit those in their 80s. A small change in that slope starting early can have a huge impact
Oh,
downstream
absolutely. Hmm.
and push that disability threshold far into the future. Now, it came to me in sharp focus with our patients where because of their muscular dystrophy, for example, they're starting at a much lower threshold. And as even over a 4 or 5 year period, we see people ending up, a cane, a walker, a wheelchair. So taking those thresholds that we've well defined in our patients, I started thinking about that concept to this disability with aging. It's a much longer time frame, but it's the same thing. People, as you see older people using their walkers in the old age homes, and then eventually, if they get really weak, they're in a wheelchair. It's the same as what we're seeing in our patients, just over a longer period of time. So our concept and the whole company was let's stay above that disability threshold. And the time to start is being healthy in your 20s and 30s. Again, like we say, you put on too much body fat and you're sedentary, it's harder to reverse that.
Mm.
So thinking about it when we're younger so that the last 10 years of our lives are without significant disability. And that's what some people refer to as your health span. And I really think there's two concepts. And all this garbage I hear about, taking this drug or this supplement that, you're going to live longer and, this longevity, and this crazy person, I won't even say the name, who, spends $2 million a year and thinks that he's going to live longer. He's going to, I'm sure,
Right.
a side effect. The only thing that's there is endurance exercise to increase your lifespan by 4 years. Resistance exercise and endurance combined gives you that, a healthier life in the last 10 years. So a better health span. But we
Mhm.
do know that with obesity, with aging, the nutrition becomes more important, but the nutrition also is nuanced, and we need to really consider things. But also, there's great research, as you pointed out, in creatine. But if you're taking a creatine gummy with zero creatine in it, you're not going to get the benefits. So
Mhm.
taking the right supplements, or considering your diet, because you don't need to take supplements. They are definitely convenient and helpful for many people. Certainly the Trim 7, you couldn't get that from your diet, and that certainly does support mitochondrial function. And in addition to the obesity, I mean, I take it myself just because, I have oxidative stress and inflammation
Mhm.
going on in my brain and every part of my body. And anecdotally, I hit my head badly and developed a cataract. I was
Mm.
just starting, and I started taking the Trim 7 for about 4 months. And my cataract went away. Early
Unbelievable.
cataracts or oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction. And that was confirmed. My wife didn't believe me by my ophthalmologist that my eyes are now crystal clear, which is interesting. So many other benefits that we can do to stay above that disability threshold. And that's where the term came from.
Stay tuned to the Fitness Industry Council of Canada podcast for the next edition of this interview with Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky.